All right. Well, this Sunday is Easter Sunday. A lot going on, including, of course, Connect Group. So I hope that you will be here, first of all, for sunrise, and then breakfast, and then Connect Groups, and to teach your class. And we're in Matthew 28 because it's Easter, so they move to the resurrection account in Matthew. And this lesson focuses kind of on the relationship between the resurrection and the Great Commission. And so you might want to ask yourself and ask your class, why would they do that? Or how important is the resurrection to the gospel? And hopefully they'd all come back with responses based on like 1 Corinthians 15. So 1 Corinthians 15, Paul writes, now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached to you, which you received, and which you stand, and by which you are being saved, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered you first of importance that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. So without the resurrection, you don't have the gospel. It is foundational to the gospel. Paul goes on in that passage to speak of various individuals that Jesus appeared to, and including 500 at once, many that were still alive when Paul wrote. Getting into our text in Matthew 28, of course, we see some of these appearances, early on appearances, plus a reference to an appearance that the passage makes it look like would have happened that day or right after, but doesn't happen. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first of all, notice that the resurrection of Christ was after the Sabbath. It was on Sunday. It was on the first day of the week. And there's significance to that. The timing of the resurrection, I think, establishes a clear change in when believers worship, because Jesus had now fulfilled the law. Sabbath was a huge part of the law. Jesus fulfilled the law. Jesus becomes our Sabbath. He becomes our rest. The Old Testament law emphasizes Sabbath. New Testament grace, we now worship on Sunday. And I hear Christians, I hear people in this church refer to Sunday as the Sabbath. Sunday is not the Sabbath, and I think you're really doing a disservice when you make that like some kind of Christian Sabbath, because not only is it biblically inaccurate, it's, I think, kind of harmful to the point of why the day was moved, why the worship day was moved. It kind of takes away from the fact that Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath. And it just confuses people that might grow up thinking Sunday's the Sabbath when it's not. So I would be careful about that. Verse 1 is interesting, that the purpose of the women that were going to the tomb, they were going to the tomb to anoint a dead body, not to find an empty tomb. And that is interesting, as we continue to see throughout this passage and the other Gospels, the surprise of the disciples about the resurrection, even though they were clearly told about it and it was predicted and communicated to them several times by Jesus. Notice verse 2 through 4, the fact that the angel rolls away the sealed tomb. This is very significant. I don't think the curriculum really emphasizes this to the level that I'm going to, so I want you to think about this. In Mark 16:3, they were actually wondering about the stone. Who's going to roll it away for us? And verses 2 through 4 here, Matthew emphasizes that it was rolled away, and that the guards witnessed that. The guards saw the angel who rolled away the stone. Verse 4, the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. So they witnessed it. Then they went into some kind of paralyzation or lack of consciousness or something because of their fear. But they would have been woke up and I think still remember that these angel rolled away the stone. Now, why is this significant? Well, the concern that the women had about who's going to roll away this sealed tomb that Mark 16:3 talks about, and the fact that the guards were still there guarding the tomb when it was rolled away, really dismisses two theories that people come up with to try to invalidate or dismiss the resurrection. One is called the swoon theory. The swoon theory was that Jesus didn't really die. He just kind of went unconscious, and he's in the tomb, and he wakes up and he leaves the grave. Well, in order for him to leave the grave, he would have had to move that stone and break the seal. But the stone was still sealed. It was still there. Jesus was not there. He rose and he left the grave miraculously. Also, another theory is that the disciples stole the body. Well, again, they would have had to move that stone. They would have had to break that seal. They would have had to somehow do that without the guards seeing all this. But the guards were there. So two of the theories to try to explain the resurrection are destroyed by this fact. And then the angel goes on, he is not here. Why are you seeking the risen among the dead? He is not here. He is risen, as he said. Come see the place where the Lord lay. So the angels here are emphasizing really the bodily resurrection of Jesus. Come see the place where his body lay. In other words, his body wasn't there. In 1 Corinthians 15, the great resurrection chapter, Paul was really motivated to write that on the false teaching that was in the Greek philosophical realm that the Corinthians were being influenced by, that the resurrection was only spiritual, that there is no bodily resurrection. And so here's a good discussion question for your class. Why is that important that Jesus rose bodily from the grave? Why couldn't he just resurrect spiritually? The answer to that is that his death and resurrection redeems all of us. And what I mean by that is not just our soul and our spirit, but our body as well. And it also, Jesus' death on the cross has a redeeming effect that will eventually take place on the new earth. When we have the new earth, the earth will literally have its curse removed. But getting back to us and our bodies, in order that Jesus truly redeem us, he had to redeem all of us, because our body is affected by sin. And we're going to live on a literal new earth, and heaven is a literal physical place. So we need to have a literal physical body, albeit still a spiritual glorified physical body, but we have to be physically raised from the dead. So 1 Corinthians 15 emphasizes that. Now, a curious thing about this passage, I really haven't noticed a lot of, in the classes, a lot of people asking difficult questions, to be honest, noticing things and bringing up things. But if they were to bring this up, I want you to be prepared for it. In Matthew 28, we see 3 times a reference to Jesus meeting with the disciples in Galilee. Verse 7, go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he's going ahead of you into Galilee, and there you will see him. Verse 10, then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid, go and take word to my brethren to leave for Galilee. Verse 16, but the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee. Now, here's what's complicated about that. This doesn't happen right away. Jesus appears to the disciples in Jerusalem in the upper room the night of his resurrection. Then 8 days later, he appears to them again in the upper room. That's where Thomas is there and sees the risen Christ. Galilee would be a 7-day journey for the disciples. So basically, they couldn't have actually left for Galilee and met with Jesus till about day 15 after the resurrection. So the question is, why does Matthew emphasize this like this? We need to keep in mind a couple things. The Gospels are like this, where they will present something that looks close, but there's gaps there, because as John said, we can't record all the things Jesus said and did. And they emphasize certain things to go along with their purpose. Now, Matthew was written to the Jews primarily. And in the Old Testament, in Isaiah, for example, chapter 9, verse 1, it's emphasized that the Messiah would also bring salvation to the Gentiles. Isaiah 9:1, Zebulun in the land of Naphtali, but in the later time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. We know Jesus spent a lot of time in Galilee. He was actually a Galilean. He was from the region of Nazareth. 2 chapters prior to this, in Matthew 26, verse 32, he says, after I'm raised up, I'll go before you to Galilee. So I think Matthew probably is emphasizing this Galilean meeting, which happened somewhere close to the events of John 21, where Jesus meets the disciples at the Sea of Galilee, and he has the famous, well-known, I should say, discussion with Peter, do you love me, feed my sheep, etc. Writing to a Jewish audience, and especially emphasizing here that Jesus did a lot of his appearances outside of Jerusalem. Yes, he appeared to the disciples in the upper room, but Jerusalem is the site of the Jews' ultimate rejection of Jesus, right? The crucifixion. So I think Matthew's kind of emphasizing that this Messiah that your Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, is also bringing salvation to Gentiles, and part of that equation, I guess you might say, is the rejection of the nation at large, the Jews at large of him. It is also in the region of Galilee where he, in verse 18 through 20, where he gives the Great Commission. And in that, just kind of move him down to that spot in the passage. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. We might want to challenge our class that we are told to go, not to wait for people to come to us at the church. We're told to go, and we're to go to the nations. What are some ways they can literally go? What they like to say is, well, we'll just give to missions. That's not what the Great Commission is. It might be a way that we help enable people that are going, but we are to go. And we're not all called maybe to do it full time, but all of us can go. And I think all of us should go. At some point in time, all Christians should go on a missionary trip outside the borders of their country, and throughout our daily living, we're supposed to be going into our own community, into our Jerusalem and Judea. So challenge your people on that. I gave a little alliterated outline of this last part. I'll just throw it out there for your benefit or whatever. The mission is to make disciples. Okay, this is verse 18 through 20. The mission is to make disciples. The measure of that is all nations. The message is teaching them all that I command you. And I think that's important that we understand that discipleship requires depth in teaching. Okay, it isn't just presenting the gospel. It's getting into all that Christ commanded us, all that's in the scripture, a lot of solid and deep truths that we need to be teaching. In order to teach them, we need to know them. And then the last thing is the might. I had trouble with this one, but that was the best word I could come up with that alliterates. And that's the idea that God gives us the enabling, the power. He says, lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And I've shared several times that phrase really was an encouragement to me as I was heading to Ukraine and all the danger that's there. I knew I wasn't going alone. Jesus would be with me, and I would be as safe as he wanted me to be. And so our people who often are afraid to go, or maybe afraid for their teenagers to go or whatever, need to be encouraged by that truth as well. Well, I hope to see you, and I will be out of town next week. I don't know that I'll have a video for you next week, but you'll be fine if I don't get one done. See you on Sunday.